1. Both my mother and grandmother raised my brother and I, so you can say I had two mothers. We called our grandmother Big Mama. Funny name for such a little woman. She was 5 feet tall, maybe 5'1". Always a bit overweight. Her parents were half-breed Cherokees. She had pale white skin, but high cheekbones and a large jaw, like many Indians do. Like I do. I have the same pale white skin, but Indian features. If I had white hair, I'd look like an albino Indian. Anyway, loved her to death. She loved us, and cared for us along with our mother. My mother had a horrible sleep disorder, which I have. If she got too much stress, she couldn't sleep. She'd be up for weeks upon weeks, sometimes months. Of course, the mind goes after about 2 or 3 weeks with no sleep, and her husband, my father, was an extremely stressful man. Lost money gambling, screamed all the time, every night in drunken rages. So she'd leave him many times, and we'd live with Big Mama. A cousin of mine gave her the nickname Big Mama before I was born. To a little kid, she seemed big, but again, she was small. Anyway, at the age of 96, she went into a rest home. I tried to visit her, but the more demented she became, the less I visited. I'm sorry for that now. But I can see I was trying to de-bond with her. Because I loved her so much, I believed that her death would have killed me. So I tried to disbond. Horrible, I know. But that's what I did. I saw her one last time, and I knew that was the last time I would see her. That last time, she kept knocking on the wall with her knuckles 3 times, then 3 times again, then 3 times again. I said, "Big Mama, what are you doing?" She said, "I don't know." I left Washington State and went to Utah. A few nights after I go to Utah, I was in a motel bungalow. I had 4 walls. To my right was the outside. To my feet was the outside. To my head was the outside. Another room was to my left, but the walls on the other sides just led to the outside. At about 10 a.m., my dad calls me and tells me, "Your Big Mama has passed away." I cried. I knew it was going to happen. I took a bath later, and I said, "Big Mama, if you still exist, please, please give me a sign. And tell me you still exist." A few nights later, at 12 midnight, I heard 3 knocks on my front door. I looked out. Nobody there. I went back and laid on my bed. I heard 3 knocks on my far wall, 3 knocks on my wall to my left, and 3 knocks on my wall near my head, about a foot above. And it sounded like it came from the inside, not the outside of the room. All the knocks were in swift succession, so I either imagined it, or 4 people were outside my room, knocking in quick succession for some reason. Or Big Mama answered my prayer. And like I said, I knew her since I was born. Half of my life I spent with her because my mom would leave my dad all the time. She went back to him for economic reasons. Because of her sleep disorder, she'd always eventually lose jobs and have to be put into a mental hospital for a while. They'd give her all sorts of drugs, shock treatments, nothing worked. They eventually gave her some strong sleeping pills, and she'd sleep for 3 days and wake fine and perfectly sane. The same thing happened to me a few times. I inherited her condition. Believe me, if you want to know what hell on earth is like, stay awake for a month. Today I take sleeping pills every night, and a swig of NyQuil, and I'm fine. Anyway, several years after my grandmother dies, I'm in Utah at a singles dance. Most of the people there are Mormon. I used to be, but not then, and not now. But I enjoy the dances because I was single, still am, and I enjoyed them. And I'm allergic to nicotine, and back then, all the bars and strip clubs were smoking. So I had to content myself with the Mormon singles dances, even though I wasn't Mormon. They had a big singles dance at a place called Wheeler's Farm, south of Salt Lake City. A big, converted barn, modern sound system, paved parking. It was fun. Light show, refreshments, punch, and cookie stuff. No smoking, no alcohol. I enjoyed it. Never met a woman I dated there, but I enjoyed it. Mormon singles dances are for divorced, never married Mormon singles. Usually people over 40. Lots of Mormons get married 25 to 30, stay married for 5 to 10 years, then get divorced. Very, very few 30-ish people attended these dances. Never a man or woman under 30. The under 30 Mormons had their own young adult dances elsewhere. Most of the people at these dances were mid-40s. All the attractive women were divorced from womanizers. They all eventually would marry another womanizer. Then you had the never married bunch. These were gravitationally challenged women who never married. The men were either womanizers who were divorced, these were the most popular men with the sexy women, or the mentally challenged, or had MS or some chronic health condition that prevented them from attracting a mate. I must admit, yes, I fell into this category as well, because of my sleep disorder. Just like my mother, I go from functional to no sleep for weeks, to dysfunctional, to put on sleeping pills, sleep for days, functional again for a few months or 7 months or whatever, to no sleep for months, and back in the hospital, experimented on with all sorts of antipsychotic drugs, until the doctors finally gave me strong sleeping pills, and I sleep for 3 or 4 days straight, wake up, and was fine and normal. This process repeated itself over the curse of 30 years until finally I didn't listen to the doctors anymore, and I self-medicated by over-the-counter sleeping pills and NyQuil, and finally controlled my condition. Anyway, I digress, but that is why I never married. Attractive women don't like poor men. Poor men don't like the only women who like them. Women no other man wants. Anyway, of course, you're going to conclude that I have hallucinations because of my condition. Okay, maybe you are right. All I can do is report to you the truth of what I saw and heard. Are these things my own imagination, or does my condition permit me to see the other side? Flip a coin. All I know is this is truly what I saw and heard. One night, a Saturday night at the dance in Wheeler Farm. Got plenty of sleep the night before, feeling fine. I was staring at a very beautiful Mexican girl. She was about 30. Very young for this crowd. Tall and thin, obviously from a wealthy Mexican family. She spoke pretty good English, but was from Mexico. Very beautiful, pure Spaniard blood. I looked at her from across the room and thought, well, if I had money, I'd definitely date that girl. At that moment, I see a little arm and a little hand to the right of me, pointing at the Mexican girl. I look over and down and see a tiny woman, who appeared to be about 20 years old, in a white jacket. She had brown hair, slightly curly. She said, "Excuse me, what do you think of that girl over there, the one you're staring at?" I looked at this little woman and I was about to say, "Who the hell are you?" but I noticed her jaw. That was Big Mama's jaw. I would recognize that jaw anywhere. I turned away fast, almost in shock. She said, "What do you think of that woman over there? Do you want to date her? Would you like to marry her?" I forced myself to look at the little woman beside me again, and she had pale white skin and very high cheekbones, and a prominent, large jaw. Her eyes were just like my grandmother, down to the grey-green color. I said, "Well, she's not my culture. She's just not my culture." I lied. I didn't want to say the truth, which was, yes, I would date her, but I was poor. And I had a condition that kept me poor and probably would all my life. And beautiful girls do not like poor men. That's the truth, but I said, no, she's not my culture. The little girl, about 5 feet, pointed at the Mexican again and said, "You should date her, you should marry her. It's okay, she'll understand." At that point, I looked at the Mexican woman again, and I was about to say to the little girl beside me, "Who the hell are you? Why are you telling me these things?" But, and this is the truth, as soon as I thought that, she jumped and said, oh, and started to turn around and run the other way, behind me. I turned as she did, and followed her around until I saw her arm disappear. By the time I turned around, and this turning happened in 3 seconds, she was gone. Gone. I looked all around. She was gone. The last thing I saw of her was her little arm, which disappeared right before me. That is the truth, my friends. Yes, you'll claim I'm lying. I am not. Or that I hallucinated. Well, that is what happened. That is what I saw and heard. No, I never approached the Mexican woman. I would see her at dances for a long time, and then never again. No, she didn't disappear. She got married to a rich man, of course. Hallucinations. Just our imagination, or a window to another dimension. I'm sure you know the right answer, but maybe you don't. 2. The first time I used a Ouija board was just over a year ago. A group of friends and I agreed to use it as a joke, or maybe for a fun story for later. We started drinking early in the night and forgot about the board. Only after we had gotten fairly drunk did someone see it and remember. By this time it was nearly 1 a.m. We were all laughing and joking as we got the board out and set everything up. Someone suggested that we turn off the lights and use candles. Candles were set up in several places around the room. We started off saying your generic questions. After about 10 minutes, we received no answers. We decided to go out for a smoke break and get more beer. We all came back after maybe a half hour and gathered around the board and began talking to each other. We decided it was time to give this another shot. We tried to put our fingers on the planchette when we realized it wasn't where it was. When we set the board, it was at the center. It was easy for us all to reach being there. It was now at the lower center of the board between the yes and no. We were a little creeped out, but completely blew it off because we were all a bit drunk. We placed our fingers on the planchette, just like before. The only difference was that we started with the planchette where it had been moved to. After a couple of random questions, we started getting movement. There was only a few questions that we asked that were answered. After the initial movements, we asked if someone was there. Nothing. We asked if their intentions were good. Nothing. Then someone, out of turn, asked, "Do you know any of us?" The planchette moved to yes. We asked who it knew. Nothing. Then someone asked for a sign so that we may know who it's familiar with. A few silent minutes passed and everyone was keeping an eye open for anything out of place. I noticed shadows dancing on the walls behind my friends. Then I noticed they were all looking at me. I froze as what I assumed was fear. Fear gripped my throat. I asked what was wrong. One of them asked a general question. "Is the air on?" I didn't get it. My eyes started shedding tears uncontrollably. It became difficult to draw in a full breath. It felt like someone was sitting on my chest. I asked what's wrong again. This time I could feel a small panic in my voice. One person said, "Look at the candle behind you." I turned to look. The flame was dancing, flickering, fading to almost out, then flaring up again. I noticed it was very strange how it was behaving. I looked at the other candles in the area, not a movement, not a single flicker. We placed our fingers back on the planchette. Just as the last person touched it, the piece flipped and landed upside down. At this point my throat hurt. It felt as if it were swelling and I had trouble breathing. I couldn't help but to tilt my head down until my chin touched my chest. I had an intense heat on the back of my neck. I felt what I can only describe as the onset of a migraine. Hit hard. Tears were streaming down my face. I forced my head up to look at everyone and they froze. My pupils were nearly blown. Even in the candlelight, they could tell something was going on. The scorching heat from my neck had moved all across my torso. I felt like I was on fire. My head had an intense pounding surging through it. I couldn't sit any longer. I stood up and just started walking. I made my way outside in the freezing temperatures without shoes or coat. I was still burning alive. I stripped off my shirt and walked around for several minutes. I heard people yelling at me. I walked back to the house, still without a shirt, and asked who was yelling. None of them were. They were afraid to follow me. I could have sworn someone followed me out of the house. Also, that someone had been screaming at me while I was out there. One of my friends got up, put his arm around my shoulders and asked me to sit down. He said we needed to close the session and put back whatever showed up. His face wore a concerned expression as he placed his palm flat on my chest, then my back. He looked straight at my face and asked very calmly and nicely if I would like to sit down. As I sat, he asked if I'd like some cold water. I said yes and thanked him. And then I thought to ask, why cold water? He said that he couldn't tell that I'd been outside. I felt like I was running a very high temperature. They all touched the planchette again, this time to close the session. I couldn't manage to keep my fingers on it. The very moment my hands would come close to the board, my fingers and forearms would get visible and painful cramps. If I managed to touch the planchette, my fingers would spasm and I couldn't keep contact. As I forced myself to maintain contact long enough to try and get rid of whatever was doing this, something was written out. Our curiosity got the better of us, and we watched. It was just a bunch of seemingly random letters. Then someone asked the wrong question. "How old are you?" There was a pause of several seconds. Finally, the planchette twitched. It stopped on 1, then carried over to 0, then stopped down at yes. We all looked at each other and paused. The same thought crossed all of our minds. Did we just fall for that? As quickly as we could, we closed up the session, boxed up the Ouija board and put it away. Even very recently, something feels off. Other people around me have even reported unexplainable things happening. Any suggestions? 3. So, I'm just starting this off by saying I'm not sure what it was, but I personally feel it was my grandma's or granddad's spirit, as it felt warming and just, well, welcoming. So both my grandparents passed away a year ago, one just before the other, and both due to cancer. One died of leukemia, and the other due to breast cancer spreading to her bones and blood. Both equally as hard to see. So, anyway, Now you have a little idea of how long ago they passed away, and what they died from. I can tell you my story. So recently I started a job as an apprentice chef, meaning long hours and stressful ones at that. But to combat the stress from the job, as well as a long-standing sense of depression and isolation I've been feeling more and more, I've taken to smoking, and smoking a few cigarettes a day to take my mind off of things and just relax. Anyway, tonight I was walking and just thinking about life, so my job, my insurance for my car and my pets, my Army Reserve application, and how I could fit the hours required for that in with work and relationships with friends and family. As I was walking home and was rolling up a cigarette, a sudden warm feeling came over me, and I felt loved and wanted. And I stopped rolling my cigarette to look down and see a large, fluffy black cat, purring and rubbing against my leg, looking at me in a happy, almost comforting way. So I stroked the cat and walked on, continuing to roll my cigarette, the feeling of warmth and happiness never leaving me. As I was about to light my cigarette, my lighter, a brand new Zippo, which I had recently filled, and I knew which works, kept on being blown out, and the flame kept dying down, even though there was no wind. As I walked on, the warmth and the cat followed me, and as I walked, the feeling and the need for my cigarette declined to the point where I didn't need it anymore. And as I put it away, the warm feeling became stronger and more secure, and the cat became more friendly, nudging my leg again and again. And this feeling of warmth, love, and security, as well as the cat, followed me all the way home. I personally think and hope this cat was my grandma, trying to prevent me from smoking and preventing me from the risk of getting cancer from smoking and passing away from a disease that she passed away from. I'll leave it to your interpretation. 4. So before I decide to just jump into this, I figured I would give a little bit of backstory that may or may not relate to that night. When I was only 2 years old, I lost both of my parents in Pennsylvania. So from a very young age, I had a full concept of death. As a kid, I was used to seeing black, human-like figures out of the corner of my vision, and as soon as I would glance over, it was always gone. So to begin with, this night, years later, we moved to Florida, and this road we lived on was exactly half a mile long. There were tall trees to either side of the road, so when it got dark, well, to say the least, it was dark. The road had a small hill at the beginning, and right at the top, there were 2 houses and a streetlight. At the very end of the road was my house, and 4 others, but between the streetlight and the end of the road, which was roughly 3/4 of that half mile, was where the woods began. There was no other streetlight on that street, except that one at the other end of the road. I used to half walk to my bus stop for high school down this road. Nothing weird ever really happened but once. One time I looked down to light a smoke and noticed a person's shadow run under the light. This shadow was like any other person's shadow, flat on the ground. I never really thought much of it until, say, 4 years later. I was maybe 17 at the time, and was headed out for a smoke before I went to bed. It was a hot summer night in Florida, and we had heat lightning. Between the ages of 13 to 17 were some of the hardest years of my life. I guess you could say my parents' passing sunk in through the years. Anyway, I was having a bad night. My depression was pretty bad at this point. I had it timed where I could smoke 1 cigarette walking down my road and another walking back. I began my walk how I always did, threw in some headphones and started leaving my driveway. Once I got to the road, I lit up my first cigarette and began walking towards the streetlight. About 1/5 of the way there, I changed the song on my iPod, and when I looked up, I noticed something standing in the street. I distinctively saw two kind of glowing red eyes, so my first instinct was to rub my eyes. I thought maybe my eyes were adjusting after changing the song on my iPod. This, however, was not the case. After I rubbed my eyes, I looked up and it was still there. And I went into a phase of zoning out. I couldn't look away, and it was making eye contact with me. I was too scared, my body froze up, and I just couldn't look away. I couldn't move. I was just frozen there. It seemed like I was there for hours, but realistically it was probably only 10 seconds. The heat lightning flashed, and this time I saw the whole figure. It was roughly 500 feet away from me, but appeared to be roughly 6 feet tall and looked shrouded. It appeared like steam was emitting off its body. The body itself was pitch black, but around it was like black steam. The worst part was the moment the heat lightning was lighting up the sky. It was just like a horror movie. All you could see was the eyes, but it had moved closer without actually moving. It just stood there staring at me and I couldn't move. After the first flash, its head appeared to be confused like a dog, slightly cocked to the side. The heat lightning flashed again. Its head went back straight, and again moved about 15 feet closer. This happened 2 to 3 more times and I just snapped out of it. I turned around and ran as fast as I could back to my house, never daring to turn around for fear it would be right behind me. Since that night, I have never walked down that road at night again. It has been maybe 7 years since that experience. Every year when I come home to visit my grandparents, I'll smoke in the driveway sometimes, looking down the road. Every time I do, my hair stands up, and I get this gut feeling like I shouldn't go near it. Sometimes even when driving down this road, I get this gut feeling I should just stay away. 5. Thinking about the nature of these experiences, this may sound silly to some of you, given some of the more sinister experiences on here, but this is something that happened to me when I was a child, and it is still unexplainable to this day. I was around 7 to 8 years old at the time this all started, and my parents had decorated my room for me. It was a very girly room, and they were extra excited to show me this new wall lamp they had bought me. It was a bright red love heart that would sit over my bed. It made the full room glow red. I always had this distinctive feeling of uneasiness when it was switched on, but at that age I ignored the feeling and didn't want to make my parents feel bad by not using it. Now, I also had a few teddies at that age, and my parents had bought this sturdy netting hammock type thing that was attached to 4 hooks on my ceiling. This stored all of my teddies. The weird things started to happen one night when I decided to put my heart lamp on whilst I slept. I was in the in-between stage of sleeping, where you're not awake, but not fully asleep, when I heard the biggest bang on the floor. I instantly shot up in bed and started to shake, absolutely petrified. It was my teddies. They were all over the floor. My dad came running in and said the netting must have snapped, and they would sort it in the morning. I was scared, but went back to sleep. The next morning, my dad couldn't explain how they'd fallen. The netting hadn't broken. It was as if it had been unhooked. This went on to happen several times over the course of a few weeks. My parents even bought a new, thicker netting hammock, assuming the one used was flimsy, but it still kept happening, never breaking. It always happened when the lamp was on, and always when everyone was asleep. The last experience I have of it. The full hammock was on the floor with my teddy still inside. The 4 hooks were still in the ceiling, and the hammock was not broken. It was like the whole thing had been unhooked and dropped. At the same time that this was happening, I started experiencing another thing that I still to this day cannot explain. This was around the time Pokemon was huge. My bedroom had 3 mirrored sliding wardrobe doors. Inside this were my clothes and boxes full of toys. During the night, when I had the red heart light switched on, I heard the words Chansey out loud, clear as day. It woke me up. Now, I specifically remember this because I have never owned a Chansey toy. The word Chansey would replay over and over again until I would get out of bed and it would stop. Honestly, I was petrified. It always sounded as if it was in different places inside the wardrobe. Every few nights I would hear it loud and clear, waking me up. I looked through all my toys and couldn't find a toy that would make that noise. I remember telling my mom about it, and how it would wake me up and scare me in the middle of the night. So one day she cleared my full wardrobe out, but she couldn't find anything that would make that noise. As the weeks went by, I was so scared to go to sleep. I stopped turning on my red light because it had such a weird vibe. But I couldn't explain it that age. I just knew it scared me. From the day I stopped turning it on, everything stopped. I never heard the word Chansey again, and my hammock never moved. My mom redecorated my room a few years later, and we joked about the Chansey thing. She took down the full inside of the wardrobe. Everywhere was stripped. She still tells me she never found anything in there. This may sound like a ridiculous story, probably not even scary to anyone else. But as young as I was at the time, this petrifies me still to this day, 20 years on. I can't explain whether it was paranormal, but there honestly was something not right about that red lamp. They are still sold in IKEA to this day. I walked past one a few weeks back, and my mom made a joke about how it was an evil lamp. But it's definitely not funny to me. It felt evil. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 20. I really hope I haven't burned you guys out on the paranormal stories after last Friday's video, but I think we had a good bunch, a good selection this time. Oh, and can I also just say, could you make sure you're getting notified when my videos go up? Just the last couple of videos, they've done okay views-wise, but I'm sure they should have done a little better than they did, so I'm starting to think some people aren't getting notified about the videos again, which is so irritating when that happens. So just check to make sure they're showing up in your sub boxes if you could, please. Before I go any further, I'd just like to say thank you very much to all the 5 people who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Oh, and I'd also like to say that if you remember our old friend Deshauntes, the Mormon missionary, he's posted a bunch of new experiences up on Reddit, and well, he did kind of give me blanket permission to keep using them. It'd been a while, so I just wanted to check in, make sure it was still okay, and it's still okay for me to use the news stories, so I'll be narrating them and getting them up in a video in the coming weeks. They seemed to go down quite well last time, so I'm sure you guys will be looking forward to them. Okay, so I think for now I'm going to head off. I'm actually about to record the video you will have probably heard yesterday. For some reason I'm doing this in reverse order, and that would be the collaboration I just did with Mad Mike. Or I'm about to do with Mad Mike. I'm getting my tenses mixed up. Okay, anyway, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.